Welcome to AARP Personalized Nutrition's first webinar, Eating for Optimal Health and Wellness. My name is Mark Lenz. I'm the Chief Marketing Officer at NutriStyle, and NutriStyle is the platform that powers AARP Personalized Nutrition. Our presenter today is Jess Smosna, a registered dietitian and the leader of functional nutrition at Healthier Tomorrows. Healthier Tomorrows is a group of registered dietitians specializing in nutrition therapy, individual nutrition therapy. And they are a partner of AARP Personalized Nutrition, providing support to members who choose to work with a personal dietitian as they get involved in their path to health and wellness. Recently, in a recent study that was completed by the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics, more than 80% of the participants experienced significant improvements in key health markers when they worked with a personal nutritionist and used the NutriStyle platform. This opportunity is available to all members who decide to work with a personal dietitian and use the platform as part of their health and wellness journey. You can find out more at nutrition.aarp.org. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Jess, and she'll walk us through her program today.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Mark. I'm excited to be here, and I hope that you all walk away with some new information to help optimize your health and maybe leave you feeling a little bit better. So a little bit more about me. I am a registered dietitian with Healthier Tomorrows, which is a practice based out of Chicago, and we assist clients throughout the country. So we have dietitians all over, and we help clients all over as well. So the beauty of telemedicine and virtual appointments is pretty much amazing for us, and the amount of people that we can reach and really just provide guidance to. So I do take more of a functional approach, meaning that I'm looking to address the root cause, and everything in our body is interconnected. And so the more that we can support what I call my 5-tier pyramid, where sleep is our foundation, stress resilience above that, which we're not trying to remove stressors necessarily, but helping our body to better manage stress so that we don't have the negative side effects from that. And then hydration, then food, then movement. So as you will see, food and movement are kind of the top of the pyramid, which obviously as a dietitian, I focus a lot on food, but again, everything is interconnected. And so we do want to be mindful of even our sleep and our stress resilience and how that's impacting our nutrient absorption in our body and our digestion and our hunger levels and our cravings and all of those aspects. So you will hear me touch on some of those things throughout the presentation, but just wanted to kind of give you an idea of, the dietitians that at Healthier Tomorrows do focus on more of a whole body approach and kind of more of that holistic. And we have a whole functional nutrition team. We also have dietitians specializing in other areas, which I will mention later. But that is kind of where I'm coming from for today's presentation, and I hope that you will find it beneficial. So just a little disclaimer prior to starting is if you are going to implement any new diet or exercise program, please always discuss with your doctor first, just to make sure that, even if I make fluid recommendations, if you potentially have, any fluid restrictions, that would not be applicable for you. And so I am offering a lot of generalized recommendations, but just for your health and safety, please do consult with one of your physicians or practitioners prior to implementing anything new. So when it comes to eating for optimal health and energy, I think it's really important to recognize all the things that our food choices can impact. And I think a lot of times we think about food as, okay, I have to eat food and my body requires it, right? I know I have some clients who say, I wish I could just take a pill and I didn't have to think about food so much. But unfortunately, and fortunately for food lovers like myself, we do need to eat regularly, and we need to be mindful of the nutrients that we're putting into our body, right? That's the purpose of food, is to provide our body with energy and nourishment and fuel so that we can optimize our health. And so, of course, depending on what we're eating, it can negatively impact or positively impact our alertness and our focus. So there may be meals that you consume, and afterwards you find yourself a little sleepy or tired or foggy brain. Maybe Thanksgiving meal is a good example. I think a lot of times individuals feel like that tryptophan in the turkey can be a contributing factor, but it can also be if we eat a larger meal, right? And maybe we feel, a little bit more relaxed. But also our alertness and focus could increase from the foods that we're consuming. And again, that's kind of the takeaways that I would love for you all to have today is what are the ways in which we can eat and the foods in which we can consume that leave us feeling our best, because it feels good to feel good. So some other things that can be impacted is motivation and productivity, our energy for sure. Mood, I don't know about any of you, but if I go too long without eating, I I am told by my husband that I should probably not talk until I eat, because I do tend to get a little hangry. And I know individuals who get anxious, which is kind of a relatively new term to me, but very applicable. And then also our sleep and our stress. And I think what's important to note too is that all of these things can be impacted by our food choices, but also all of these things can impact our food choices. And sometimes we get in kind of this vicious cycle of, especially if stress levels are high or we're not sleeping well, we tend to reach for food as that either like comfort or that energy boost, or we're looking for convenience foods because we don't really have time in our day to prepare something. And so then it can kind of lead to this, again, that vicious cycle. And so we want to be mindful of, are you noticing any changes in how your body feels based on your different food choices? And what are the things that we can do to build up the body, right? And really providing nourishment and energy. And then are there foods that you notice that are, for lack of better terms, breaking your body down, where maybe you feel more achy, maybe you feel more tired, maybe you just don't feel like yourself and your mood is off. And so being mindful of that, I think it's very powerful to have an ongoing conversation with your body, which I know is easier said than done. And sometimes it seems that our body is speaking a foreign language to us, but the more that we can kind of tap into that and recognize, what it is that how our body is responding. I like to ask myself the question of how will this leave me feeling, whether it be our food choices or lifestyle choices. But I think the more that we can kind of connect what we did with how we feel, the more that we experience an increase in motivation for the things that leave us feeling better. And by all means, that doesn't mean, oh, I know this food doesn't leave me feeling well. You don't have to avoid it entirely, right? But just recognize there might be some consequences in how you feel. And sometimes those consequences are totally worth it. But I think just having that intuition can be very beneficial. And also having a strong foundation and simple kind of like tricks can be extremely beneficial, because during stress, we tend to reach for those convenient foods and then we don't necessarily feel well. And so a lot of what I'm going to talk about today is balancing blood sugar and things that will help to reduce inflammation. And part of that is because I do believe that those two things are key for optimizing health, but also because when we focus on those things, we do feel better. So it's kind of a win-win situation. And so if we're diving into that and more of the blood sugar balance, I like to think about it as this jar and lid analogy. So I think about carbs as a jar. If I had an empty jar and I put vapor gas in it and there is no lid, that gas is going to escape. So if we eat carbs on their own, so let's say, for example, a piece of bread or even a piece of fruit or maybe some chips or crackers, our blood sugar is going to spike, and maybe at different rates based on how much fiber is in the food itself, because fiber does slow down that blood sugar spike. But our blood sugar spikes nonetheless. And so when our blood sugar spikes, our body is putting out more insulin to help to get that sugar into the cell. The magic key to get sugar into the cell is exercise, and that does not necessarily require that insulin then. So movement is very beneficial as well. But let's talk about it more from just the food perspective. So if we have more of that blood sugar or that sugar in our blood, we're going to put out more insulin. What happens if we have excess sugar and insulin in the blood, though, is that it triggers more fat storage and inflammation, specifically fat storage around our abdominal area. And that inflammation is the root cause of almost all disease states. And so the more that we can reduce that inflammation, the more that we're supporting longevity and our health span. And so that is a big area of focus. So rather than having these, what I call naked carbs, or this empty jar or jar without a lid, we want to put a lid on that. And that lid is protein and quality fat, which seal the deal, slowing down digestion and absorption so that your blood sugar is more like these speed bumps as opposed to mountains and valleys. And that's also going to help with energy and, again, just leaving your body feeling better, as well as kind of reducing that inflammation in the body. So we have our jar, which is our carb, and then our lid with protein and quality fat. The next component is what I call the ribbon, and that's your veggies, specifically non-starchy vegetables, which could be your leafy greens, it could be bell peppers, mushrooms, zucchini, cucumber, all of those. Your starchy vegetables, which are more like your potatoes, sweet potato, corn, peas, beets, all of those root veggies and squashes, those are going to be more of a carb. So those would count as that jar. So every time we eat, we ideally want to make sure that we're balancing and putting a lid on that jar. If, let's say, you wanted to have a snack that was just a handful of nuts, which would be more a quality fat and maybe some protein, minimal carbs, that's fine. I think of a lid, if there was like a bug that was running around on the table, like one of those little pesky fruit flies, and you put a lid on it, you would trap it. So when you put that lid down, or you have that protein or quality fat, you're keeping your blood sugar more stable. But if you just were to have that open jar and you put that pesky fruit fly in there, good luck. It's going to go out and it's going to keep bothering you. So being mindful of that. And then taking it a step further, where we want to be mindful of this three-pronged approach to supporting insulin sensitivity. So insulin is a component that when we have insulin resistance, that's where then we are setting our body up for diabetes and just more inflammation in the body. So my three-pronged approach to reducing that and supporting insulin sensitivity is avoid the naked carbs. So avoiding those open jars, and rather than having, let's say, a piece of fruit on its own, maybe we have a piece of fruit with some nuts or with some nut butter, like an apple with peanut butter, right? And maybe it's having crackers with some cheese. So now we're adding that protein and some fat to those carbs. Or perhaps it's having a slice of bread with some butter or some avocado, right? We're trying to always pair that. Or maybe it's just having that handful of nuts or having that cheese, right? You can go without the carbs if you would like, but ideally, whenever you have a carb, you're pairing it or balancing it. The next part, and again, this is where you're taking it a step further, aiming to consume carbs as the last part of a meal or a snack. So again, if I'm going to have that apple with peanut butter, if I am putting that peanut butter, let's say, in a little bowl to serve it up, I'm going to go ahead and lick that spoon of peanut butter first before I have any of that apple, because now I'm priming my blood sugar slightly with a quality fat, so I don't get as much of a spike by having like a slice of apple before peanut butter. And it may or may not make a drastic difference depending on your body. But if this is a practice that we start to implement, even if you're eating out and, stress levels are higher and you feel like you are reaching for more of those convenience foods, then if you were to have, let's say, an Italian meal and you sit down and there's a bunch of bread at the table, that bread, if you're starting your meal with that carb, you're going to spike your blood sugar. But now let's say we save that bread for after the meal and you've had some protein and maybe vegetables and, I don't know, a starchy veg or pasta. That's a pretty balanced meal. And then if we have the bread, we're probably going to see less of a blood sugar spike because we've kind of primed our blood sugar with that protein and some fat and fiber at the meal. So just something to kind of keep in mind. Same thing goes with like the cheese and crackers, right? Maybe having a slice of cheese before you have the cheese and cracker combo. So just a little something to keep in mind that can be very helpful and applicable in most situations. Not all, but when it is, I would encourage you to keep that in mind and aim for that. And then the last component of that three-pronged approach is movement after meals. So anything that is going to engage your muscles and kind of like soak up the sugar from your blood can be very helpful. Our muscles are greedy, and when they store sugar, they do not let it out like our liver, right? We're going to utilize that sugar for exertion. And so the more muscle mass that we have, the more storage we have for that sugar as well. So individuals who have a higher muscle mass tend to have better blood sugar balance, and that can be extremely helpful. In order to kind of build that up, I always tell people, for me personally, I tend to be at my computer after breakfast and often after lunch. So I can't necessarily get up and go for like a 10-minute walk to activate my muscles, but I can sit here and I can squeeze my glutes, engage my core, and nobody would know, right? So if there are little things that you can do, just minimal movements of even just like engage your muscles and relax, engage your muscles and relax. Or maybe it's, moving your arms or moving them up and down or however you want to do it. But any type of movement that is engaging your muscles is going to help to support better blood sugar control after that meal. I'm going to take a sip of water as I'm looking at the water cup on this slide. So, what is the ideal meal, right? I think that's a big question. And the way that I think about it is ideally we want half of our plate to be non-starchy vegetables. So the many colors of vegetables and fruits, but here we're talking more about these non-starchy vegetables, is that half of the plate. They're going to indicate, the different colors indicate different antioxidants and phytochemicals or plant chemicals, which are nutrients and important for cancer prevention and overall health and reducing overall inflammation. So I encourage individuals to opt for either fresh, frozen, or freeze-dried. I'm a huge proponent of frozen vegetables and frozen fruit for that matter, because one, they're usually frozen at the time of harvest, so they are retaining a lot of their nutrients. Two, they're readily available. So if I go out of town or I just don't really have much, in my fridge or my pantry, and I have those frozen veggies, which I tend to shop at Costco, so I usually have quite a supply, then I can opt for that and I don't have to do any preparation. It's already cut and chopped. And I will say that one of the drawbacks for frozen is that it can get really soggy and a lot of times kind of have that same texture. If you have an air fryer, I really love like the stainless steel air fryer toaster oven combos. That works really well to even just throw a bag of frozen veggies in there, not the Costco size, but like a regular, maybe 12-ounce bag of frozen veggies. Put it on that grate and then stick it in the toaster oven at like 450 on air fry for 20 minutes, and it actually crisps it up. So it's not this soggy frozen vegetable. So I think that can be kind of a roadblock for many individuals. But if there are different ways in which you can cook it, another thing I recommend individuals do is buy the frozen veggies and then maybe take a small portion of them, or if it's one of those smaller bags, putting that directly in the fridge, either in a container or in its bag that you purchased it in. Let it thaw, and then you can eat them even raw or put them on a salad or into a mixture. And so you don't have to worry about cooking them and them getting soggy. So there are some ways to kind of work around that. If you prefer fresh, that's absolutely fine as well. But I do like to mention that like frozen is a great option, because I think a lot of people tend to have like negative thoughts around frozen foods, especially the produce items. And then freeze-dried options are also not as readily available, but like the kale chips, or I believe there's, freeze-dried mushrooms and carrots. And so those could be options to keep on hand as well. The other components of this plate is really a quarter of our plate protein. And as we age, we need more protein. We need to support that skeletal muscle mass, and we want to prevent muscle wasting. So really aiming for that like palm size and thickness of protein, ideally 3 times a day. If you wanted to do like a protein powder or, Greek yogurt, those types of things, then that is fine as well. But aiming to really keep your protein intake in mind, whether it be from animal sources or plant sources. But protein provides the body with the building blocks to grow and repair tissues and muscle, right? And we want to make sure that we're keeping that muscle mass, not only for, stability and balance, but also for that blood sugar regularity, and which is Alzheimer's is known as type 3 diabetes now. And so the more we control our blood sugar, the more we're supporting our brain and cognition as well. And so I think that that is such a big area of focus. Protein also strengthens our immune system. So another thing to focus on, especially this time of year as it starts to get cooler and we start to see more illness, and protein is going to create digestive enzymes and hormones. So when we think about digestion and absorption of the nutrients, we could be focusing on all of these healthy foods to consume, But if we're not digesting them adequately, we're not really reaping the benefits of all those building blocks and helping to kind of fuel and nourish the body. So keeping that in mind. And it's going to help to slow down digestion, right? It serves as that lid, which seals the deal, slowing down digestion and absorption, so our blood sugar is more stable. But also protein leaves us feeling more satisfied. So actually, if we're consuming like at least 30-40 grams of protein at a meal, we're going to increase that satiety, where we actually get some of that GLP-1 release in the body, which is similar to a lot of these weight loss medications. And it leaves us feeling more full and satisfied because it slows that stomach emptying. So we get a lot of benefits from protein. Then the other components here, we have our carbs, right? And so carbs are extremely beneficial for energy and for fiber. And we want to make sure that we're supporting digestive health, especially as we age and our risk of, things like colon cancer and the colonoscopies and all of those things kind of present. And so the more that we can get those fiber-rich carbs in, so that would be, again, your starchy vegetables, it could be your beans and your lentils, it could be fruit, or even like whole grains could fit in that category. But we're going to get some of that energy support and the fiber. And I think that's really important, as well as, keeping in mind our quality fats for reducing inflammation. So again, I think a lot of times we hear like, let's cut out all our carbs, right? And for some people that works and it is sustainable. But for most, I think we want to focus more on balance, right? And having this favorable outcome in our body when it comes to our blood sugar and how we feel. And if you notice that you maybe feel better without having a lot of carbs at your meal and your energy is more sustained and you feel satiated, then maybe that's for you. But if you really enjoy carbs and you feel like you need some of that substance to feel satisfied, there is a place for them, right? But we just want to be mindful that we're also incorporating these other components of the meal to balance them out, to leave you feeling full and satisfied for longer and to support your body and that inflammation. So that's where then those healthy fats kind of come in for greater satiety and to serve as more of that lid, but also these omega-3 rich foods that we want to aim for. So we have unsaturated fat, saturated fat, and trans fat. Unsaturated fat does include like those mono and polyunsaturated fats in our omega-3s and omega-6s, and they're known as like the healthy fats, and they tend to be more anti-inflammatory. Omega-3s especially, which generally our best source of them is going to come from like the smash fish, which is salmon, mackerel, anchovy, sardine, and herring. I can pretty much picture all of you who I cannot see. Many might be like, ooh, right? Not many of our like go-to fish, but if you can incorporate them, ideally wild caught, we can get a lot of omega-3s from those foods. If we're getting the omega-3 through things like avocado or flaxseed, olive oil, the amount of omega-3 that we get is actually rather small, because in the plant form, it's called ALA, and our body has to convert that ALA to EPA and DHA, which are those readily available essential fatty acids, or those omega-3 components that the body utilizes. And it is a difficult conversion, so we don't get much benefit from it. However, if we're consuming fish, and these fish were consuming things like seaweed, which is a rich source of omega-3, then they're doing that conversion process for us, and we get more benefits there. Same with grass-fed, grass-finished meat products. The cows are eating that grass, and that grass can be a good source of that omega-3 and help them with more of that favorable fat outcome and profile. So our unsaturated fats are ones that we definitely want to aim for, and those are going to be more of your plant sources, with the exception of those fish. And then saturated fats are often deemed as bad fat because they may raise your levels of cholesterol, but they've also been shown to increase LDL particle size. So that can actually decrease the risks associated with an increased LDL concentration. So that if you have available to you like advanced lipid panel testing, I think that's always helpful. But our particles, if they're small and dense, they're more likely to stick together. If they're large and buoyant, they're more like beach balls, and they just kind of float on through. And so they're not as harmful. And so having some of that saturated fat, I think, can be very helpful. It obviously depends on the individual. And, if you have regular labs done, then that can give you some more insight. But we want to be mindful of kind of having this combination, right, of maybe some of the unsaturated fats or lots of the unsaturated fats, and then some of the saturated fats, which tend to come more from animal products, with the exception of coconut. Coconut is also a saturated fat. So things like, butter, lard, red meat, cheese, even like ice cream, things like that are going to be higher in that saturated fat. And that would still fall into the healthy fat. And that could kind of go into one of these other categories with the protein as well. And then there's trans fat. And trans fat is one of the fats that we want to avoid as much as possible. It is made through the chemical process of hydrogenation of oils. So if you're looking at, say, cookies or crackers or popcorn or anything that's store bought and kind of more of a processed packaged item, if you see hydrogenated or partially hydrogenated in the ingredient list, I would encourage you to maybe look for an alternative if there is a better one available. Legally, if there is less than 0.5 grams of trans fat per serving, they can state 0 grams of trans fat on the nutrition fact label. So even if you're looking at that nutrition fact label and it says 0, it could be hidden in the product. So just something to keep in mind. That is one that has been shown again and again, correlated with cardiovascular health and other like inflammatory conditions. And so just trying to minimize or avoid that entirely would be ideal. So here are some meal ideas, and I recognize that they may not be appetizing to every single person, but I've tried to incorporate some variety here. So hopefully at least it, provides some, gets the juices flowing maybe for things that maybe your taste buds would appreciate. But here we have sourdough bread, so that's going to be our carb. And then we have avocado or pre-made guac, which is going to serve as our quality fat. And then hard-boiled egg, whether it's 1 or 2 or 3, that's going to be our protein. So we've sealed the deal. We do not have any naked carbs. And then we're adding some spinach, which is going to serve as our ribbon, and then salt and pepper. I do like to encourage the incorporation of herbs and spices as much as possible because they offer health benefits. Salt and pepper, not as many health benefits perhaps as like an Italian seasoning or curry powder or something along those lines. But I think flavor is really beneficial, and salt helps to kind of bridge the flavor of all of the foods. And so it just makes it taste better. I really like using like the Redmond real salt or Celtic salt, both of which offer more trace minerals. And so you get more nutrients with the food that you're consuming as well. So I always like to think about that as kind of this like good, better, best approach. And what are the foods that are going to serve my body best, right? So especially if you're just reaching for a salt, let's make it the salt that's going to offer your body the most nutrients. And so that's where, again, I recommend those options. But with this meal, you probably would not be consuming like your protein or fat first. You're kind of just like, it's a sandwich, you're eating it all. And that's fine, right? But if there are instances where you're able to consume that protein, fat and or fiber with those veggies first, then that's excellent. Another example, full fat Greek yogurt. So I am a proponent of full fat dairy products. I think that we get a lot of benefits from them from a cognitive perspective, but also from a satiety perspective. And they tend to be less processed. And especially if you can get a plain version of a yogurt and then flavor it with your own options, we're not getting that added sugar. So the more we can avoid added sugar, the better. There is no need in our body for added sugar. And so full fat Greek yogurt, let's say a plain yogurt topped with berries. Something I like to do personally is I will buy a big bag of like frozen mixed berries or frozen blueberries or cherries or strawberries, and I will just pour some into a glass jar, put a lid on it, and stick it in the fridge. And so then those are thawed and the juices are released. So now when I go to pour that over something like yogurt, I'm getting the fruit as well as some of the juices. So when I stir it, it's almost like that fruit on the bottom type of consistency, but with no added sugar. It's just the natural juices from the fruit. So that's a nice way to kind of get that flavor evenly dispersed rather than like, there was a spoonful with a blueberry and it tasted good versus like, there was a spoonful without a blueberry and that was a little sour. So being mindful of just some of those little tricks that can help as well. And again, frozen is a great option, and oftentimes it can be more budget friendly, especially if these items are out of season. And then with the full fat Greek yogurt, which is offering fat and protein, we're now adding the carbs, right? And then we're going to add some ground flaxseed to that. Flaxseed is one of my favorite foods, especially ground. If you have flaxseed in the whole form, it is going to come out the same way that it goes in. So it can serve as a beneficial fiber. But when it's ground, it is more of a soluble fiber as opposed to insoluble. So it's going to form a little bit of a gel. So if you were making this yogurt in the morning and you weren't going to eat it until the afternoon, I wouldn't necessarily recommend adding the flaxseed in yet, because it will thicken it and it might be more like cement as opposed to a little yogurt parfait that's light and fluffy. And so when we grind that flaxseed, it's going to it's going to make it a soluble fiber where it will kind of, when it's combined with water or any liquid, it's going to form a gel. And that's going to help it to kind of bind to excess cholesterol in the body and excrete it. Also great for the digestive system and removing toxins from the body. And you're going to get those omega-3s, which again, not the highest amount, being that it's coming from a plant source, but still beneficial to get those anti-inflammatory fats. And then another anti-inflammatory fat would be the walnuts, and then cinnamon. And cinnamon can be helpful for, adding some additional flavor, a little bit of sweetness there, and for blood sugar regulation. So a nice, well-rounded meal or snack. And then plain oats with thawed berries. So again, that's where I would put the berries in the fridge, just have them readily available. Oats are, they're definitely a carb, right? And they are one that can cause our blood sugar to spike. So anytime I am putting together a meal idea with a client and we're using oats, I will often add in multiple forms of quality fat, fiber, and or protein to help better balance that meal. So for this example, obviously we have our carbs with the oats, we have carbs from the berries, and then we have fat from the pumpkin seeds, some dark chocolate. If it's dark chocolate, it's going to be a fat as well, some carbs, but the higher the percentage of dark chocolate, the less sugar that's in it. And the lower the percentage, the more sugar. So keeping that in mind. And then hemp hearts serve as some protein and quality fat, and then adding pumpkin pie spice. If you wanted to add some kind of protein alongside this or a protein powder mixed in, that would be another way to get a little bit more of that better balance and that meeting those protein needs, which could be very helpful. Another meal. So this would be an example where there aren't many carbs. The cooked carrots have some carbs in them. So maybe if you were to have the salmon burger with the protein and the avocado and your steamed broccoli before the carrots, that could be one of those examples of like the order of eating. But in this example, I don't think it's as crucial, being that the carrots are not high carb, as like a potato or pasta or rice or something along those lines. So this would be more of a lower carb meal, but still very well balanced, where we have all of the other aspects of the plate in there minus the carbs. And then grilled chicken, sweet potato with butter, and green beans. So this would be a prime example where maybe have the green beans and the grilled chicken, not necessarily all of it, but at least a few bites of it prior to having the sweet potato, because then we're priming the blood sugar with the fiber from the green beans, the protein from the grilled chicken, and then we're going to the carbs, which are also balanced out with the butter for some quality fat. So just little things to kind of, again, keep in mind, maybe some meals to explore or revise to your taste buds, but hopefully giving you a good example. And then some meals when you're eating out. Right. So Chipotle is a good example, right? Where they have like the rice, the beans. So, and that usually is at the bottom, right? A lot of times I'll usually like mix it all up. But if you wanted to, before you mix it all up, maybe have some of the chicken and the fajita veggies and or the guacamole, then mix it up. And then you can kind of just take bites that includes all of those flavors. But being mindful of the fact that all of these things are going to be more whole, real foods, and they're going to be rather balanced. Notice I'm not adding necessarily any like chips or salsa to this or tortillas. We do get some of the carbs in the beans and the rice. If you wanted to have, chips and salsa or queso or something along those lines, perhaps maybe even opting out of the rice and having just the black beans, or having just the rice and not the black beans, or however you want to do it to be mindful of that carb intake, but then having the chips and the salsa or queso after having the bowl could be more favorable for your blood sugar and satiety. And then Panera has some options where it's kind of similar to the Chipotle bowl, but you can see again, more whole, real foods. I think that is, again, such a big factor, is looking at like that good, better, best spectrum. And is this something that I could technically make at home with these minimal ingredient items? Of course, there might be additional like additives and preservatives in it, But for the most part, you can recognize what the food item is as opposed to something that is in a processed form and it being a little bit more questionable. And then Noodles and Company does offer zoodles or their lean guini, and they have options that then would include protein and some vegetables. And then Mod Pizza, I think, is another popular one. And that's, where you can kind of pick and choose what you're putting on your pizza. And tomato sauce does count, as does salsa and the Chipotle bowl. Those count as vegetables. And so incorporating at least some kind of color in there is going to provide some more antioxidants and fiber and just nutrient density with that meal. So the more that you can factor those things in, I recognize that not everyone loves vegetables or, just doesn't like the taste of them or how they, maybe don't go through them in time, which again, that's where like the frozen options are nice. But I do think, salsa and those types of quick, easy, like marinara sauce, that can count towards your vegetables as well. Additional considerations, I would say limiting and avoiding caffeine, just because it can provide a false sense of stress to the body, but also because it can negatively impact our sleep quality. So there are many clients that I work with who will say, I can have coffee right before bed and I fall asleep fine. But we also want to keep in mind that as we age, our melatonin levels decrease, and cortisol and melatonin are on this balanced scale. So cortisol is our stress hormone. So when our cortisol goes up, our melatonin goes down. So especially if that's something that you're having, later in the day, especially after 12 o'clock noon, then we are going to potentially negatively impact those circadian rhythms, which are already a little bit more compromised as we age. So if we can reduce that caffeine, we can help to support that circadian rhythm, and especially before bed, supporting more of like darkness to naturally increase melatonin can be very helpful. But being mindful of that, and if you notice any impacts in either your ability to fall asleep, stay asleep, or just overall like how you feel in the morning, it could be worth trying like a half calf or a decaf version. If you're doing decaf, I recommend like a Swiss water method, just so that they're not using all of the chemicals in the decaffeination process, or perhaps even opting to a tea, like an herbal tea, or if you feel like you need that caffeine, green tea is a nice option because it contains L-theanine, and L-theanine helps to calm the nervous system. So you'll notice when you have green tea, it's more like this gradual increase in energy as opposed to a jolt that you might get from coffee. And so that is where that L-theanine kind of plays a part, where it's, again, calming the nervous system a little bit more. And then, as I noted earlier, there's no need in the body for added sugar. And so there really is no nutritional value, right, from either sugar or artificial sweeteners. And sugar feeds the bacteria, the bad bacteria in our gut. And really, like, bacteria feeds on sugar in general, whether it be in our mouth, in our gut. And that can compromise our immunity because 60 to 80% of our immune system is in our gut, and our digestive system starts in our mouth, but it can also impact your oral health. And that's not something that we want to compromise. So being very mindful of that sugar consumption. Also, the more sugar and artificial sweeteners that we consume, the more cravings that we have, especially from artificial sweeteners, because they're often 200 to 600 times sweeter than actual sugar. So we have a little bit and it's like, oh yeah, it was sugar-free, it's 0 calories, it's totally fine. But then you start to get more of this sugar craving, and it can actually negatively impact your insulin levels and create more insulin resistance. So we want to be mindful of that. And if you're going to have sugar, I would recommend using something like a pure maple syrup or dates or a raw local honey. Those would be more like nutrient dense options that you're at least going to get some minerals from, as opposed to something that could potentially like take nutrients from your body. So keeping that in mind as, kind of something when you're either formulating your meals or purchasing products, if it's realistic to add, like, for example, the yogurt, adding your own flavor with the berries and the juice of the fruit, as opposed to getting a flavored version that has, 12 grams of added sugar to it. So, and for reference, 1 teaspoon of sugar is 5 grams of sugar. So I look at a lot of like the yogurts, and many of them will have 12 grams of added sugar or potentially more. That's more than that 2 teaspoons of sugar in that. And they're not very big, right? They're like the 5-ounce containers. And technically I would view that as a dessert. Anything with more than 5 grams of added sugar, I tend to think of as a dessert. And ideally we want to be consuming more savory breakfasts, for, to start our day and set up the, a positive tone for our blood sugar and just kind of our satiety and cravings. So keeping that in mind when you're reading the nutrition fact labels. So when is the best time to eat? I think that digestive rest is extremely beneficial. I generally will recommend a 12-hour digestive rest for most individuals. Of course, if you have any medical conditions that would make that unrealistic or unfavorable, keep that in mind, discuss with your physician. But I think if we can have a 12-hour digestive rest, that does wonders for our gut to be able to heal and repair, and our brain. Our gut and our brain are intimately connected. And so the more that we allow our body that break so that we're not constantly like eating, then our body gets to focus on the rest of our body rather than just digesting food all day long and all night long. And we also want to be mindful of our eating speed, right? And so if we're eating really fast because we've gone too long without eating, then that's something we want to be mindful of. And, finding that happy medium for you is going to take time. And some people do really well with, eating 2 meals a day or eating 1 meal a day. Other people do well with eating 3 meals and 3 snacks. And again, it's listening to your body and having this ongoing conversation and saying, how does this leave me feeling? Right? If you can go longer periods of time without eating, but still consume your same amount of calories and nutrients, then I think that that is very important. The intent of this digestive rest is not to necessarily support weight loss or to restrict your intake, but more so to give your body time to heal and repair. And so, you want to be mindful of how that impacts your hunger levels. I think it's also important to keep in mind that we chew slowly, and thoroughly. And so that, if we're eating really fast and then we're not chewing, that's a big chunk of food that our body has to break down. And that's not going to be as favorable. We also may not feel as good, or our digestion might be thrown off. So being very aware of that, if you have gas or bloat or discomfort or reflux, ask yourself, how's my eating speed? Is it fast, moderate, slow? Ideally looking for that moderate to slow. And things that might help to slow you down is even using a smaller utensil. Or maybe you eat slower when you're not distracted. Maybe you eat slower when you are distracted, right? And so kind of, again, asking yourself what leaves me feeling my best and what works best for me. But the more that we can kind of slow down and even tell ourselves like, oh, it's time to eat now. I'm going to, eat this delicious meal that's in front of me. I think that's a great way to activate what's called our parasympathetic nervous system, which is a state of rest and digest, as opposed to being in this state of fight or flight, which is more, it's not very favorable when it comes to digestion, because fight or flight, all your energy is going to your extremities as opposed to your digestive system. So being mindful of even like taking a deep breath, slowing down, all of those things before eating. And then, of course, listening to your hunger cues, right? Certainly, if you aren't very hungry, though, that might mean that there's a little bit of not necessarily force feeding, but for lack of better words, making sure you're getting food in throughout the day. I do like to recommend smoothies in those instances, just because you can pack a decent amount of nutrients and calories into them without feeling like you're like eating all of this food. So exploring different avenues there, and then also keeping activity levels in mind, I think can be a factor for the timing of food. If you are somebody who is relatively active, but you notice that you feel better when you exercise on an empty stomach, then okay, that's great. And, that is fine, but being mindful of also, incorporating some nutrient density and ideally, carbs for the sugar to replenish your, the glycogen stores or the sugar stores in your muscles, some protein to heal and repair your muscles, and then quality fat to reduce inflammation, and some kind of fruit or vegetable for antioxidants to combat that oxidative stress that's produced from exercise. I think those things are all very important to keep in mind. And then the last thing I recommend too is being mindful of fluid consumption with and around eating times, because if we are consuming, ideally I recommend no more than 8 to 12 ounces, 15 minutes before, during, and after a meal. So if we were to have started eating at 12 p.m., from 11:45 to 12, and then 12 to, let's say it takes us 20 minutes to eat, 30 minutes, let's say 12 to 12:30 we're eating, and then 12:30 to 12:45 would be that 15 minutes after. So ideally from 11:45 to 12:45, we would have 8 to 12 ounces of fluid between that time so that we're not diluting our digestive enzymes, which can leave us feeling more gassy, bloated, reflux, all of those things, and decreasing the nutrient absorption. Of course, if that were to decrease your overall fluid intake, then be mindful and go ahead and have more, but focus on sipping rather than chugging any fluids. So along the lines of hydration, I think, every body or every system in our body depends on water for optimal functioning. And I like to think about our cells. We want our cells to look more like grapes rather than raisins. So we want to plump them up, and hydration is a big factor in that, as is quality fats, which strengthen your cellular integrity. But even mild dehydration can leave you feeling drained of energy and impact your mood. So if you are feeling low energy, maybe having some water, right? Or stepping outside, getting some sunshine and fresh air and having water could be helpful. But thirst can also be confused with hunger. And so we want to be mindful of that and making sure that, generally looking at the color of your urine can be helpful. And so if you see that it's pale yellow to clear, that's a good indicator. If it's yellow or dark yellow, especially, that is an indicator that you are already dehydrated. And so you want to be mindful of that. I will often recommend like half your body weight in fluid ounces of water throughout the day, but I would say as a minimum, having 8 to 10 8-ounce glasses throughout the day. Again, if you have fluid restrictions, please ignore that recommendation. And then other options for fluid in helping to kind of hydrate the body could be maybe sparkling water. I have found that, like, personally, and some of my clients, I have them do an experiment where if you have sparkling water, one, do you feel like your hydration, like you quenched your thirst? And two, is your urine pale yellow or clear? And oftentimes individuals will have sparkling water and then have like yellow urine. And to me, I take that as it's not hydrating them. And so I think that it kind of depends on the individuals. I have some clients who are like, yeah, my pee it's clear and I feel hydrated. And so I think it just depends on the individual. But herbal tea can be an option as well. And then decaf coffee. So anything that's decaffeinated could be a nice option. And then electrolytes are something that could be worth incorporating. And there are ones that are flavored. I know some of them will have artificial sweeteners in them. So I tend to use caution when recommending them, but that is a way to flavor your water and help get some more of that electrolyte balance in for better retention of that water too. And so those are other things to kind of consider. And I also think it's important to find a water bottle that fits your lifestyle. So if you're always on the go, then have a water bottle that has a straw. For me, my current is just a cup and then I can just sip on it, right? And so I have way too many water bottles and my husband makes fun of me, but they all serve a different purpose for different situations. So just kind of figuring out, what leads you drinking more water. So takeaway tips. I think a healthy intake emphasizes fiber-rich carbs, right? And so we're not just going for the packaged processed carbs, but fiber-rich options. We're focusing on healthy fats, including quality protein and adequate protein, incorporating the rainbow of produce because every one of those colors offers different antioxidants. We're really focusing on those balanced meals and snacks if you incorporate snacks. So we're making sure that we don't have any of those naked carbs. You have that jar with the lid, and then we're consuming adequate fluids. So I think all of those things are so important for fueling and nourishing the body. And again, I think about it as this good, better, best approach. So even if you were looking at like the frozen vegetables, right? Okay, so I can get these fresh vegetables that are going to go to waste in my fridge, or I can get frozen options and figuring out a way to cook them, but then they're readily available, right? And so I think just looking at those types of things, and then good, better, best for any packaged and processed items, maybe even like the yogurts, and figuring out like, oh, this one has more added sugar. Let me look at this other option, and exploring some new items could be really beneficial. But these are all kind of the foundational tips, and they can vary based on your individual health goals or needs, right? So that's where at Healthier Tomorrows, our team of dietitians is wonderful at helping to learn more about you and your desires and your preferences and your struggles, as well as your kind of overall goals, and then really establishing individualized goals to help you achieve them and to leave you feeling your best. So food, when it comes to overall healthy eating, it does not need to be complicated. The things I would encourage you to focus on most is whole real foods, consuming the balance, and then keeping it colorful. And those are kind of the three things to ask yourself each time you're eating. Is like, are these whole real foods? Is it balanced? Is it colorful? Check, check, check. You're probably good to go. So really kind of keeping that as kind of in the back of your mind as much as possible. So again, I am a dietitian with Healthier Tomorrows, and we do provide a lot of individualized nutrition support, embracing a holistic approach. Hopefully the presentation today gave you some insight into, obviously we're talking a lot about food, but some of these other aspects of our sleep and our stress and our water intake and our movement all play a part as well. And many of our dietitians are, we have such a great team of dietitians with many areas of expertise. So you'll see individuals who are great at providing guidance for diabetes or cardiovascular health. Of course, the functional nutrition piece, which I mentioned at the top of the presentation, which does fall into a lot of these other categories as well, but as well as like weight and metabolism and supporting weight loss or weight gain, and eating disorders, disordered eating, GI health, autoimmune concerns, the list goes on. But those are some of our most popular areas that we focus on with clients. And if you have any questions or you would like to discuss any of this information further, please speak to a registered dietitian who can best support you on your health journey, whether that be with Healthier Tomorrows or one of the other dietitians through NutriStyle. And here is the website for reference so that you all have that. And I really appreciate you all listening. I hope that you learned something new or a little tidbit that you feel like you can take home to try. And I'm wishing you all a wonderful day ahead.
Excuse me. Thanks, Jess. And thanks for those great insights. Very helpful. And as you say, there's no question that the opportunity to work with a professional like yourself or one of our other dietitians in our program would be extremely helpful for folks as they get started. Nutrition can be very confusing, and
Yes.
there's so much information out there on the internet that having the opportunity to engage with a professional, I think, could be very helpful for most people. So visit nutrition.aarp.org. Certainly take advantage of the opportunity to meet with people like Jess, and I'm sure you'll be off and running on a great wellness journey and a very successful one at that. So with that, I think we're going to sign off.
Sounds great. Thank you so much, Mark. I appreciate the opportunity.
Yes, thank you.